Okay, good afternoon. It's about time for us to get started. Welcome to the contributed session 2.2. We have a number of really interesting speakers lined up. When we do have time for questions, if you have a question to ask, please hold your hand up and our microphone runner here will find you with the microphone. Remember, some of these are going out on Zoom, and if you don't use the microphone, they can't hear you and most of the room can't hear your question, so please do that. So our first speaker is Cameron Pittman, speaking on collaboration between Denver Museum of Nature and Science and the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance. So, thank you very much.
I'm just going to do this. Okay, that's perfect. Hello, thank you. My name is Cameron Pittman, and I'm the Assistant Collection Manager of Vertebrate Zoology at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I did that perfectly. This is my third and last talk, so thank you. So I'm talking about the collaboration between the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And this is work that's been going on for the past year and a half, and so it's a really cool little projects that we've done together, and as we move forward into the future, hopefully we're going to build on top of that. So background about both institutions. The Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance was a kind of a cool story about a black bear given to the mayor of Denver as a gift, and then they were like, well, what do we do with this bear? So they started a zoo, as you normally do, and the initial focus of the zoo was to be almost exclusively on the regional fauna of the region of Colorado. And so, you know, it's the first zoo that also included a naturalistic zoo enclosure. There was also, it was actually called Bear Mountain, if you've ever been to Denver, and so it's a really cool, long history that the zoo has itself. And then the Denver Museum of Nature and Science was first named the Colorado Museum of Natural History, and it opened to the public in 1908. The zoology collection was one of the first collections associated with it from a donation or a transfer from Edwin Carter, with specimens as late as 1868. And so we built the museum up from that. It was one building, but then it kind of grew into a larger building that we see today. As you can see, there's like new wings that are even being built out today. There's construction going on, so I'll be excited to go back to the noise and bustle of the museum. So to talk about the proximity of the both institutions, we are a parking lot away, which is really awesome to have this kind of facilitation of projects, because literally I can just go walk over, and the thing is that the zoo thinks that we have better food, and then we think that they have better food, so it's been a really cool, like, oh, you guys come to eat lunch at the museum, and like, yeah, why wouldn't we? But it's also kind of facilitated more of the research that we've done together when we have to do with transferring specimens, from, you know, meeting together, from, you know, talking about how the city park is going to function as a, you know, living ecosystem itself. So talking about animal transfers and data sharing. The earliest known transfers are between the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance, DCCA, and DM&S is around 1903, which includes a fallow deer and a moose. And then communication is usually set up between the veterinary staff and the zoology staff. So animals are transferred to DM&S and then processed into our research collection. So it's been a really cool source of animals to have in our collection, because that means that we get taxa and species that we wouldn't normally get from the local region, of course, because the zoo has the more international or globally recognized species. And then we also have a relationship that I will not mention today, but with the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, which is actually down south near Colorado Springs. So animal and data sharing. So as of right now, we've transferred about 1,000 animals between DCCA and DM&S. Of course, information through that is provided in Arctos. So if you actually go to this QR code, you can see the project page that was built by Andrew Dahl in the very back. Can you say hi, Andrew Dahl? Thank you. And he built this to show all the connections and linkages between specimens from the zoo to DM&S, all hosted on the Arctos webpage. So it's a really cool resource to show kind of all of the different specimens, all the different projects, publications, citations that have been built out just from our relationship with the zoo. To talk about the procedures that come through that, it includes, of course, they'll reach out to us. The registrar is usually the one that will email, call, or text us to be like, hey, there's something at the zoo that you can pick up. So they will be picked up we will go over to the zoo to pick up the animals. Larger animals will be processed that same day, so that includes gorillas, giraffes, elephants. We'll try to get that done so we don't have to put it into our walk-in freezer. And then animals prepared in the collection will be turned into either a study skin, a skin clip, skeletons, tissue samples we taken, and of course measurements we taken as well, and those are all associated into the records in Arctos. And then this specimen preparation sheet that is done in the preparation lab will be uploaded into Arctos, which will include DZCA identifiers, which are given to them that are their unique identifiers, and then we'll give them our own unique identifiers for our catalog records. And so that will include identifiers of the origin, so of course the Denver Zoo is the collector of that material, and then the sex, and then other kind of easier to grab life history traits. And then researchers will request specimen parts or pull data from Arctos or GBIF if they want to know more about our captive or zoo specific animals. What we're hoping to do in the future is include some sort of processing where we include information back to them. So it's basically about mutual reciprocation. We are hoping to give them more knowledge so they can actually build reports on the animals that are given to us and then use in future projects. And so, of course, we're going to continue to pick up animals from the zoo, and then the specimen sheet will be uploaded into Arctos, but we're also hoping to include more of their necropsy information and life history information that we sometimes are not able to grab because it is, we get the animals post-necropsy, so they're already disarticulated, sometimes the organs are already removed, and so we can get some of that life history from when the animal was alive. We can actually include more information on the records themselves. So we're going to hopefully include information and data back to DZCA when their information is used. So in publications and findings, that will go back to the zoo. And then so the zoology staff will hopefully provide guidance to them so they can actually use Arctos and GBIF in their own way so they can pull the information without us having to pull it for them. So they can also be contributors to Arctos. Some other side collaborations that we've done, the zoo has a medical grade scanner, so we were able to scan some specimens that we were actually given to them by the zoo. So this is a hippo jaw that Andy Dahl is placing on the medical grade scanner. You can see me actually behind the window, mad that I'm not able to do that part. And so it's been really fun to see that, and those scans are on Morphosource as 3D scans, and actually also the CT stacks. Then also the previous entomology curator worked with the DZCA hoofstock staff to rear and study unique species of dung beetles. So that's a really cool collaboration that the both partnerships have had. And then staff at both institutions have joined the Zoomu network, which is an NSF-funded project that I will talk about right now. So the Zoomu network is a newly established NSF-funded coordination effort to connect biodiversity collections, including living collections and natural history collections. And so we are having a focus on living and preserved biodiversity collections, so we're including specimen transfer, database connectivity, and human capacity in a way that we can bolster both of our efforts to create a stronger force as we go into the future. And the workshop this past March that I was able to go to was hosted in North Carolina by the Duke Leamer Center, which is kind of a cool example of that because it is a zoo, it's a museum, they do research, they have a paleontological collection, and they're also doing live animal research. So as we are looking forward in this Zoomu project specifically, we're looking to develop a common CMS system or language between the zoos and museums to be able to better use terminology that kind of transfers between the two, because when we say metadata or attributes, they might have a different idea altogether, and this is a way for us to kind of go through that and create a stronger dictionary for these kind of terms. So we want to help facilitate the publishing of zoo data for the public, which is going to be kind of a novel idea, while also respecting the sensitivity of zoo data because not all information should be shared, especially when it comes to zoos. But this QR code will take you to the Zoomu website where you can see some of the efforts that are going to be going on, including webinars and summaries that are going to be posted sometime in the near future. So the future of our collaboration is definitely iterative. We're going to hopefully be building on this. I'm going to go back to Denver and have a meeting with the registrar, Jessica Grote, who's also a co-author of this presentation, to talk about how we can move forward. We're going to try to improve the exchanging of animal data back and forth between the two institutions, and we're finding methods of digitizing animals, so seeing if we can digitize more specimens, scanning more specimens, because that's always a fun and crazy thing to do, and then considering implementation of biobanking. If you're not familiar with that, biobanking is kind of the cryogenic preservation of zoo animal parts that might be coming from living specimens instead of just post-transfer or post-mortem of those specimens. And so that might be something that we can work to in the future, because DMNS just facilitated their cryogenics lab just last year, and so we are now building that space up to hold more specimens altogether. And so with that, I will say thank you, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We have a lot of different collaborators on this project, so it would be really cool to chat more about this. So thank you.
Questions?
Thank you. Thanks. That was a great talk. I was wondering, like, we receive zoo animals as well, and post necropsy, sometimes they're in kind of rough shape. Has the Denver Zoo modified their necropsy protocol at all to like make the specimens that will result from them any cleaner or nicer?
Somewhat. We are definitely in talks about that. We are talking with their necropsy pathologist and then our preparator to see kind of where we can kind of collaborate on that. Something that they have done is, when they separate the organs, they actually kept that together, and so it's easier for us to like go through and find the heart, lung, and stuff like that. So that's one way that we have made it easier, but of course there's a little bit more that they understand that, like when we want to make a study skin and the skin is kind of in pieces, they understand that. So we're working on trying to build that collaboration, and that's going to be kind of the protocols and procedures that we're going to build together.
Awesome. So I'm just curious, because you have to process these large animals on the same day, do you get enough lead time do you always have enough people around to help with that, or like do you process it at the zoo, in your lab? Like how do you process like something like a giraffe in the same day?
Yeah, so it depends. I guess with the draft, it was actually a kind of three-tiered part, because it actually got sent to CSU to be processed in their large animal necropsy veterinary school, and then we went up and then brought it back down to Denver to complete that process. In terms of hands-on, we have all hands on deck. So we have the prep lab, and so Andy Carrillo is our preparator, and she has a team of volunteers that also come in every day that can help out with that. But also we've gotten the help of some people in other departments at the museum to help when we like have something big come in and we're like, we need all hands on deck. Can we have some extra hands? And so some people in this audience can actually talk about their time, even though if there might be earth science or archaeology, anthropology, they've come to help as well. So it's kind of been cool to have multiple departments kind of come in to help with the process.
So have you ever run into some, obviously, we have a more abstracted view of the specimens as a specimen, and zookeepers are naturally going to be very attached to animals that they may have been caring for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the species. Mm-hmm. Have you ever run into any sort of more, I guess, emotional aspect issues or social issues with some of the zoo staff, just because you're then taking those animals they may have been very attached to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, of course, yeah, we want to treat the animals respectfully as they go or transfer to our facility as research specimens. Of course, we've talked to the zookeepers about it, and they understand the importance and the reliability of us to be the stewards of that information. So yes, unfortunately, the house names are always included with the specimen, and so we know, when they say like, oh, we had this specimen, and that life history is attached to it for them. But we always are willing to collaborate and like talk about how we want to tell their story in a way, both online, digitally, or in person. But yeah, we always talk to them when we bring over specimens, and they kind of see the value of it overall.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Having once spent a lovely Thanksgiving day helping necropsy a giraffe as a zookeeper, I feel your pain. Let's see. Okay, our next speaker is Carolyn Levitt-Bussian, speaking on the transportation, curation, digitization, and damming of 2,000 Cambrian fossils from rodent feces-filled garbage to an AAM accredited repository. And you'll get the runner-up prize for best title at the meeting.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for staying. My name is Carrie Levitt-Bussian. I'm the Paleontology Collections Manager at the Natural History Museum of Utah. The only one who calls me Carolyn is my mom when I've done something bad. My co-authors are Liz Anderson, who is doing most of the physical curation of this collection, and Allison Wilkins, who's doing the digitization part of this collection. So usually, you have a best case scenario in terms of if you're going to get a huge donation, right? You get the donation and it's great. The curation happens. You can house it. You can number it. You digitize it, and then it goes on loan, and then it's researched and published, and science can happen. Hooray! In this donation, it was not that smooth. We only found out about the specimens because they had been published. So it's like, okay, so now we know that they exist. Great. And then the people passed. And then we found out that they were in their garage. And then we got a donation in a very weird way. And then immediately upon hearing about this, we have researchers who wanted it on loan. And then when you get them back, then we digitize it and then we curated it. So not the best way possible. But it's an interesting story, and the good news is the fossils are really important to science. So this is Dr. Richard Gerard and Dr. Sue Hagedal. They were professors at the geology department at the University of Utah. I'd like to think that they coordinated their outfit that morning to get these pictures taken. But they do a lot of things like geomagnetization work. But then they just got excited about fossils. And so they just loved these fossils from Utah, and they just kind of went crazy. And the good news is fossils are awesome. Like I said, they're good, important to science. The fossils have data. I mean, they're professors, so I'm glad they wrote stuff down. This triples our Cambrian collection. The Natural History Museum of Utah is usually famous for our Jurassic dinosaurs, our Cretaceous dinosaurs, and now Cambrian fossils. So now we have about 5,000 Cambrian fossils and counting. Invertebrates, though. I'm a vertebrate paleontologist by trade, and so if I had to identify these by taxa, it would be schmear on rock. So I'm glad that we have people who know more about that than I do, and publications. So yeah, they had publications. That's how we knew about these fossils, which is amazing. Bad news is that it was stored like this. So, you have hoarders, and then you have hoarders that don't write wills, and then you have hoarders who like fossils. So anyway, this is what we got. And then I was talking about then everyone wanted it on loan. So these are the researchers that we're dealing with, Dr. Rudy LaRose-Abril and Dr. Javier Ortega-Hernandez. The minute they heard about this, they were like, oh my gosh, I need everything on loan. More bad news, some of these are the thinnest fossils I have ever worked with. And then, of course, wanted me to ship it to Harvard. And I'm like, oh, God, please no. But I worked with our paleontology prep lab manager, Tyler Berthasell, and he came up with this idea where we have these very tiny, thin shale jellyfish. At least those look like jellyfish. I don't know, smear on rock. But what Tyler did is he melted a bunch of carbo wax, adhered these slabs to a wooden board, and then we were able to ship it off, and they arrived in one piece. Thank God, it was amazing. And then if the researchers wanted to remove them, they just need to heat it up just a little bit to take it off. And then, so how we dealt with this crazy collection is we first brought the published specimens to the museum, because those are the ones they already had our numbers on it. We could prove that the people wanted them to be with us in our collection. So those are the ones that we brought over first. And then after dealing with the next of kin and getting their permission, yeah, of course, these University of Utah professors would like this collection to go to the Natural History Museum of Utah. And for good measure, getting a permission letter from the BLM, we felt comfortable bringing the rest of the stuff. So this is garage. This is porch 1 and porch 2. And yeah, and these are the filing cabinets. So one cool thing is that they obviously recognized the best of their collection, and so they put what they thought of as the best of their collection into these filing cabinets. And so we started with those first. You got to start somewhere, right? And luckily, I was not alone in this endeavor. I had a wonderful team, but we did have 3 days to do this, which is insane. And so these are some wonderful people, Nathan Ong and Alex and Nikki, and they were part of this assembly line to try to unpack things, house things, and then direct which truck it was going to and which truck was going to which destination. Some other wonderful people. It was in a garage. We had the garage door open. It was freezing. It was March. We had space heaters trying to go, and then we kept on, all the power would go out, and then we'd have to start all over again. But so we did that. Then this is some more wonderful people helping out with this process. We did an assembly line, and what made this really cool is barcodes, and I'll come back to that. Allison Wilkins, who's our digitization collections coordinator, you should all be lucky enough to have an Allison. She forces me to use technology, and I really don't like it. But she taught me how to use barcodes, and we have a NetSum barcode scanner, and this really helped with this process of cataloging these specimens. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, being stored in a garage, there was a lot of mouse poop and mouse urine on the fossils, which is gross. Talk about a pest management problem right off the bat. And so we have to use some enzyme cleaner to clean these off before it gets to our beautiful museum. We had several trucks, and so we were just like, okay, we're allowed to take the published specimens. They're clean. These are the ones that we think are the most important to science. Let's move those directly to the museum. Don't stop to go or whatever. And then we have another field truck, and you can see Julie in the back of the field truck playing field monkey, and those boxes were going to go to a storage locker. So we did make the decision to have an off-site storage locker to deal with the fossils that had to be opened, had to be cleaned, had to be curated, and then brought up to the museum. This is our beautiful storage locker. Liz tells me that every time that she's there on a Monday, there's like a band who's practicing right above her, and so she knows all their songs. But this looks pretty cool. This was us armed and dangerous with our barcode scanners, and we were very cold. This is just crazy. Fun fact, barcodes, depending on the paper, if you get them too close to a space heater, they turn black and they're no longer useful. So pro tip, don't do that. So this is our barcode scanner. Allison made these really cool stickers with the QR code, and we assigned it to everything. We assigned it to the house, so the Hallgedal house. We assigned it to the back porch. We assigned a barcode to the garage and then the hallway. And so we were able to track where they all came from, if there's any associated data that are with them, and then also in those filing cabinets, the number of which filing cabinet 1, drawer 2, etc. And then each moving box had a barcode, and then each specimen had their own barcode too. And so instead of giving it a catalog number, which we didn't have time to do, we would just give it a barcode number, and then that it would go in, using Sapphire, it would go into our EMU database, and it would have that barcode number be the catalog number, temporary catalog number, until we actually get to curating it. And then we brought them to the museum. So this is our cool Sapphire form that Allison made. And you can see that it has, we could just use our own personal iPhones, we can use our own personal iPad, and we can just scan it. It goes onto this smart device. You can take a picture of it. Even a crappy picture is better than no picture at all. And then it is ingested into our EMU, which is really cool. This is Liz Anderson, curating and transporting the fossils. She looks happy here, but she's mostly cold when she does this. And then this is our location movement record in EMU. So you can see that it has the whole history. It has, okay, it was found in the garage. It was on shelf 5. Right now, it is currently on wire rack 3 in their offsite storage unit. And then when it gets moved up here, she'll scan the barcode again, and then we'll know that it is now in our permanent location instead of a temporary location. So that's pretty slick. And these people, again, they're professors. They wrote stuff down, which is great, but they did it on Post-it notes, and they just flutter away. And so we tried to take the picture with a Post-it note, but then you know how things go with drawers and multiple things being stored in different places. So it's really cool to track these movements. And then you can see this one is one that has gone through the whole thing. You can see that it was found in the back porch. Then it was in moving box number 3123, and then now it's in its permanent home in the Natural History Museum of Utah, room 3103, row 5, drawer 16. So it's really cool. This is Nikki Krivka, and she's photographing and digitizing them once they come to the museum, which is awesome. And they're pretty cool. I mean, even I know that these aren't just smears on rocks. I mean, these look pretty neat. I mean, arthropods, sponges, stuff like that. And what's really neat is with Allison's amazing help, she is ingesting all of these pictures into our dams. So we have a dams. We're part of the University of Utah when it suits us. And they figured out their dams with the Marriott Library. And so we've been ingesting some of our stuff in there. And since I don't know anything about Cambrian fossils, it's amazing that these pictures are now in there, and then we're sharing it with Rudy and Javier so that from their desk at Harvard, if they're ever bored or want to contribute to science, they can be like, oh yes, of course, that is a blah, and then we will update it into our record, which is really cool. This is one of the really cute, cool ones. Even I can tell it's cool. And then for all you tech people, there is an ARC ID, which is awesome, and then we can put that into our EMU instance, either as a multimedia record, but then also you can just click on it in the admin tab, and then it'll magically open up into the dams, so that we don't have to have the 2,000 pictures of all the fossils in there. You can just have the link into our awesome dams. And then, like I said, researchers identify it for us. Since you'll probably have technical questions, and I probably won't know the answer to it, Allison Wilkins is right there, and she can answer some of your technical questions. This is her contact information. She has to deal with all the digital stuff, and as you can imagine, with how much of hoarders of fossils they were also hoarders of technology, and they felt the need to print off every single piece of paper that they've ever read. So this is some of the computers and stuff that she has to deal with. Everything from floppy disks and CDs to different types of computers. I loved this CD that just said worm, which was hilarious. But the science is happening, which is really great. With Rudy and Javier's help with identifying things and them just being like, please, 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 can I have all of the jellyfish? And then they give me the numbers because they have numbers in the dams. Then I can ship them off the very thin fossils to them so that they can do their science. And they're just publishing things like crazy, which is really awesome. And that's what we want. We're the facilitators of science, and this is what we would like. And so this was a crazy project. I don't ever want to do it again, but you know what? We'll probably have to. But now we know how to use barcodes, thanks to Allison making us do it. And these are the people I'd like to thank. It was 3 really rapid days trying to figure out technology, freezing our butts off in a garage full of mouse pee. And so the amazing team of volunteers helping out, Liz for doing most of the actual physical curation, Allison for doing all the digitization, and Nikki for taking all the photos. So with that, Allison will take all of your questions.
We have time for a question or two.
Okay.
Questions?
We have questions that Allison and I could try to answer. Here we go.
You mentioned that you used an enzymatic cleaner to clean a lot of the stuff. How do you, what cleaner did you use, and how do you do that without damaging the fossil?
Yeah, I just Googled, pet stain removal cleaner stuff, and I just got it on Amazon. And just a generic one. I don't know. I didn't ask our prep lab manager if it was okay. I just didn't want it to smell like rat pee anymore. And so we'll see. We just use it with a Q-tip to try to remove it. And if something is like that bad, then we might just be like, maybe we don't accession it into our collection. Because that's, yeah. So, yeah.
We have time for one more quick question. Anyone has one?
Question for Allison. Having dealt with a similar collection where the issue came up of antique computing equipment necessary to read files, is that anything you had to deal with this?
Certainly. Have any of you guys ever heard of a jazz drive? Yeah, we actually had one of them. Apparently they manufactured them out of Utah, and you don't know how difficult it is to find a jazz drive reader in general, but let alone the connector that allows you to connect that to a computer anymore. But for the hard drives, we had computers, Mac computers ranging from an iMac from the early, like one of the early laptops from like 2000 to like 2012. So we just tore the hard drives out of them and were able to read them and connect it. So it's a lot of legacy that, and there's different software we use to transfer between Adobe Dreamweaver and some other really interesting video game software that I found on their computers that I definitely don't play, but if you ever want to play a 1993 copy of Myst, I can hook you up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, some of those don't sound so old to me. Not that I would, you know, make a point of it here. So this brings us to, oh yeah, the PDF, I forgot. I think that worked. Okay, so this is Eleanor Hoger, winner of the Title of the Year contest with My Circus, My Monkeys, Managing the Unexpected During Collection Recuration.
Okay, it's people. All right, hello everyone, thank you for coming. Today I'll be sharing the behind-the-scenes story of the recuration of the Old World Primate Collection at the American Museum of Natural History and some of the unexpected hurdles that we encountered along the way. First, I wanted to give you a quick overview of the collection. As you can see, it has nearly 4,000 specimens. This map shows the distribution of collecting localities across Africa and Asia. But most importantly is the fact that since 2010, the collection has received an average of 300 visits per year, which is impressive by itself, but especially when you consider that the collection's only open for 250 days a year. Okay, next. Here's an image of the Old World Primate collection prior to recuration. The 19th century cabinets you're seeing here have heavy steel doors, which after more than a century of use became very warped. Many were impossible to fully close, leaving specimens exposed to dust, urban soot, and pest infestation. Specimens were kept in wooden or aluminum drawers. The wooden drawers were slightly acidic and also provided nesting spaces for pests, while the aluminum drawers coated specimens in a fine dust every time they were pulled out or pushed back in. Both of them were prone to bending and breaking. You can even see the first aluminum drawer there, it's starting to just bend a little bit. Inside the drawers, overcrowding was a common issue with as many as 15 skins in some drawers. This led to mechanical damage as specimens were being removed. Years of heavy use also led to disorganization within the collection. Researchers often returned specimens back to the drawer they thought best as opposed to where they had pulled it from, and this led to a lot of disassociation between the skeletons and the skins. So, due to the collection's scientific significance, a major recuration was deemed necessary. Fortunately, in late 2015, we were awarded a grant from the National Science Foundation, and here are some of the goals we set in that grant, including rehousing, updating taxonomy, and georeferencing. It was a big list. This isn't even the entire list of everything we wanted to get done. It was very ambitious, but we figured we had 3 years to get it done. We would be okay. And initially, the project did go very smoothly. For the first 12 months, we moved the entire collection into temporary housing spaces. And by move the entire collection, I mean we moved the flat skins from the 5th floor to the basement. We moved the procyonids into the space that we had just moved of the cats, and then we moved the lemurs into there were several moves in order to make space to get the Old World primates out of this space. We also at that time then threw away all of the old cabinets. While this was happening, engineers reinforced the mezzanine, which would not be able to accommodate the new Delta cabinets, and electricians came and updated all the wiring. This collection is housed in the very first building of the American Museum of Natural History, which was built in 1869, I want to say. Yeah, okay. And so you can imagine things have been added to it as we go, and so this was a good opportunity to get it to the best we possibly could given the parameters of the room. While this was all happening, staff collaborated to create recuration protocols covering label making, rehousing, and updates to taxonomy and locality. A key protocol we developed at this time involves separating the skulls and the skeletons. Since skulls are the most requested part of a specimen, this minimized damage to other bones. Another important step was documenting any unresolvable issues. Like you can see here, an extra tooth was found with this orangutan. We included a dated and signed note with all of these problems. This ensures that the problem won't be reinvestigated unnecessarily in the future. Notes were also made when problems were resolved. So for instance, several specimens had 2 catalog numbers because prep types were originally split between the mammalogy department and the now defunct Department of Comparative Anatomy. In 1947, when the Department of Comparative Anatomy closed, its material was transferred to mammalogy without anyone realizing that some of the specimens were already associated with mammalogy catalog numbers. Using primary documents, we resolved these cataloging duplications. One important instance of this involves this juvenile gorilla carcass that you're seeing here. Its carcass belonged to the Department of Comparative Anatomy, while its mounted skin belonged to mammalogy and was put up in the famous Akeley Hall of African Mammals. So now the full history of this object is understood, and due to our protocols, this information is accessible to researchers and future staff. As with any project, occasional adjustments to the protocol were necessary. So from time to time, staff meetings were held to address these issues, and we would move forward with verbal understanding of the new standards. And this worked pretty well until half of the staff left at the same time. In fact, at a farewell lunch for one staff member, the other chose that moment to announce that they had found a new position. So this left only one museum specialist to remain to manage all of the mammalogy visitors, loans, and to continue with the recuration project. Understandably, the recuration project wasn't the top priority and it fell behind. The real problem, however, surfaced later when new employees were handed outdated protocols with only institutional knowledge to maintain the consistency of the project. We spent nearly 3 months tracing the changes we had made and consolidating an updated protocol document. Had we kept the protocols updated all along, onboarding would have been much more efficient. Okay. So the original grant budgeted for 2 quarter-time positions to assist with georeferencing the 530 unique localities found in the collection. But while waiting for these positions to be filled, museum staff began updating the localities using a simple Google Maps search, assuming that the new hires would then later input the actual coordinates into our database. However, we soon realized that Google Maps is not the most reliable source. About midway through our hominid collection recuration in late 2016, we discovered that the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of our most heavily represented countries, had recently redrawn provincial boundaries. Fortunately, this was early enough that correcting inaccuracies only cost us about a month, but it did spark a larger conversation about the reliability of the sources we were using. So from then on, staff moved much more slowly, verifying information with up-to-date geopolitical sources, and when necessary, referring back to original field notes. In 2019, we hit one more obstacle with localities. A postdoc pointed out that our labels were always formatted by country, province, and then specific locality. However, for researchers, island names are often more useful in places like Indonesia, another major source of our specimens. So after careful discussion, we decided to prioritize usability over consistency in the collection. So for island nations, if the island was larger than the province, we listed the island first, and you can kind of see that here in this chart on the right, or on the left. But if the province was larger, we continued to list the province first. Fortunately, this change came late in the project and required relabeling over 200 specimens. So just as things were getting back on track, a global pandemic. Like everyone else in this room, we had to quickly adapt. How do you recurate a collection that you don't have access to? We chose to pivot to the georeferencing portion of the project, which could be done remotely. Learning from previous setbacks, we emphasized clear communication. The 3 museum specialists had daily phone calls and followed by weekly check-ins with our collection manager. We created shared documents, one for logging locality questions, which were reviewed weekly, and one for ensuring consistent language across the database for easy searchability. Thanks to these efforts, we completed all the georeferencing at home, and once we returned to the museum, we resumed updating labels and reorganizing the physical specimens with minimal delay. It was a demanding process, and it took longer than expected, but the final results speak for themselves. The collection is now housed in boxes made of archival material and placed in new Delta cabinets with chemically inert powder-painted steel drawers that slide in and out beautifully. If anybody has Delta drawers, you know. Sorry. Taxonomy localities for every specimen have been updated, and these updates are reflected on both the cabinet and the drawer labels. Inside the drawers, specimens are neatly organized with labels clearly showing proper placement. Skulls and skeletons are boxed separately so researchers can retrieve what they need without disturbing the entire skeleton. And larger skeletons are separated into manageable trays to reduce the risk of mechanical injury. All right, okay. We also took care to preserve small elements such as hand and foot bones, loose teeth, and the hyoid in individual bags to prevent loss. Every single skin, box, tray, and bag has its own individual label with the updated taxonomy and locality. At the same time, we preserved original tags that were beginning to deteriorate. Here you can see an example of a tag encased in mylar and tied to the specimen alongside the new label. This preserves historical information while ensuring clarity for modern users. Thanks to these measures, years after the project's completion, the collection remains well maintained. I took this picture for this project. This is not like right afterwards. We're still doing good with it, which leaves specimens with better preservation and more accessibility for researchers. So to summarize, while you can't prepare for everything, and it's important to allow for flexibility during recuration, good planning is key. So here are a few recommendations I would make moving forward. First, involve the people who will be working with the collection while you're developing your protocols. This ensures that the procedures will be useful to both staff and researchers. Second, treat your protocols as a living document. Regularly updating them ensures continuity and smooth transitions for new staff. Third, prioritize georeferencing and locality updates early. This will reduce errors and save a lot of time later. And finally, maintain open communication among your team to ensure consistency in both the collection and its database. I'd like to thank everyone involved in this project, staff and researchers alike, and of course, thank you all for joining me today. Are there any questions? I have time for questions.
Question?
I'm okay if nobody has questions. I'm happy to sit down.
At any part of the process, was there a consideration to trying to address historic pesticide contamination, considering the age of the collection?
Not particularly, no. We just didn't have the time or the budget to do that kind of remediation. We've done it with other projects that had more severe, but this was mostly, besides the initial pest management tactics that were taken, the old cabinets just had like a little pesticide tab in them, so we got rid of all those tabs that nobody should be touching. But other than that, we didn't do anything to the specimens.
Other questions? Yes, right there.
That spreadsheet of the geopolitical subdivisions of the DRC is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And that could be very helpful for my collection. I'm sure everybody else's.
Well, I cannot take credit for it. I actually have it is just on Wikipedia.
Ah, okay. I was going to ask if you had more for other countries around the world, but if
No,
that's
I
a
do not. I'm
Wikipedia
sorry.
poll, I'll take a gander.
But
Thank you.
this was how we found out about it. One of our coworkers just got on Wikipedia for something and went, guys. So Google just hadn't done the updates yet at that point.
Okay, we're going to do one more quick question if anyone has one. Oh, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting to have separated skin from the internal organs and all the internal.
Oh yeah,
So,
and the two
different
separate
departments.
departments. Yeah.
No, we had the same thing at our museum for different museums, actually. Did you also experience different registration numbers for those two specimens?
No, they
No.
were accessioned together. They were just then separated and put into different departments.
Okay, thank you very much.
I did not make those decisions. This is
No, this was the 1800s with us, yeah. Okay, thank you.
no problem. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Good. All right, moving right along. Oop, had it and I lost it. There we go. Okay, our next speaker is Alyssa McGurr. She's going to speak on sex biases in a herpetological collection, a deep dive into the University of Connecticut's American bullfrogs, lithobates, Catesbianus. I can tell you now, the males are bigger.
We're going to get to that. So, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming here today, or coming to my talk today. As said, my name is Alyssa. Oh, geez. Thank you. So, thank you all for coming here today. As said, my talk is going to be about specifically sex biases in herpetological collections. I think this is an issue that is very relevant to most collections that deal with organisms that have separate sexes, which is a lot of them. So why does this issue actually matter? Well, when you look at some of the more recent work that's been done trying to identify what's going on with those sex biases in collections, there's this really awesome paper by Wainwright et al. It came out 2024, so a very recent paper. They looked at over 5 million adult specimens from various herpetological collections all over the world that had been uploaded to GBIF. What they found was that of those 5 million specimens, 95% of them had no associated sex data. This has serious consequences if you want to look at anything related to the reproduction of these animals. Not only does it have consequences for your data, if you don't know what the sex bias is, you can't correct for it when you're doing your statistical methods. It also can have serious conservation consequences. Now, this hasn't been studied in herps, but there have been some very recent papers looking at sex bias in bird conservation, and that is actually losing us the fight to protect some of our endangered species. So it's a very consequential issue. A little brief overview of Yukon's bullfrogs, and a little bit more on why I specifically chose bullfrogs. So they're collected from about 1950s to the present day. They're primarily going to be ethanol collections. I'm sure we have a few skeletons. I didn't look at those. And they're primarily collected in Connecticut. There are also a few oddballs that were included in this project. And why bullfrogs? Well, if you've ever been herping, if you've ever even taken a nature walk into an area where they've either are native or have become an invasive species, you've probably heard, hey, you can tell herps apart, or you can tell male and female bullfrogs apart based on the size of their eardrum. I was like, great, this is going to be easy. I don't think I actually verbalized that. If I did, I'm very sorry, before getting started on this project. So I followed the methodology set out by Asahara et al. In their 2020 paper. Very cool organismal paper where they looked at a whole bunch of different bullfrogs, dissected them open, looked at the sex organs, and then took various measurements. So for those of you who are not herpetological people, the tympanum is going to be the eardrum. It's an external feature that's very easily visible in most amphibians and in these bullfrogs. You measure, we're going to take a look at this specimen. So the white bar across the eye is basically the long measurement of the eye. And then that white bar that's down at an angle right next to it is the measurement across the tympanum. I use this particular specimen picture because he's a mutated critter. That animal actually has 6 limbs. Ended up not being included in the study because it was too small, but really cool. And so that was why I decided to pick bullfrogs as the main focus of this project. And then, well, turns out when you actually look at the results from Asahara et al.'s paper, the little hash marks down at the bottom where it's slightly thicker, those are areas where the male tympanum to eardrum ratio overlaps with the female tympanum to eardrum ratio. Surprise, it's on a spectrum, unfortunate for my project. So what I ended up doing, so with this project, we weren't actually able to go in and dissect or open up any of the frogs. That was, considered destructive sampling. You may or may not know it's very hard to get permission to do that, especially on, I think it ended up being about 73 specimens, which was the entire, large adult animals in the collection. So again, I didn't even bother asking for permission to do that. Basically, the decision I ended up making was looking at their graph. If you see where that red line is, that is a line that I added in. It's not included in their data. And that is the point at which roughly the same number of females are excluded above the line and the same number of males that are excluded or included below the line. So it's like, well, it's close to being an accurate representation, or close to having a roughly even number of females excluded as males that we're including in that population split. It's not precise. There are more females, the end result is going to be biased towards females. So I'm including slightly more males below that line, and I'm excluding slightly fewer females above that line. So going into this, we already know that the results are going to be skewed in favor of the females. So I'm adding in slightly more. So for the statistics, when I drew that line, I ended up with 43 male specimens. Remember, that is an undercount, and 30 female specimens. That is going to be slight overcount. Assuming you were going into it with a completely unbiased collection and a roughly 50-50 split of males and females, you'd expect to see 36.5 females and 36.5 males. So clearly there is some skew there, but is it statistically significant is the question that really matters. Did a very simple chi-squared goodness of fit test on this data, and what the p-value turned out to be was about 13%. So what that means is there is a roughly 13% chance that if you're going into this with a 50-50 split, just by random sample bias, you would see that 43 to 30 divide. And remember, that is an overestimation of the number of females and an underestimation of the number of males. So probably this data is actually more biased than that even that 13% chance suggests. Now, because we can't actually open up the frogs, we don't know the true sex bias in the collection, so the statistics are going to be a little bit limited. The results, actually one of the most interesting results was that so I ended up looking at 198 specimens. Of those 198, the vast majority of them were considered too small to include, so they were below the smallest size of sexual maturity for snout to vent length. So I was like, hey, not going to have them in as part of this project looking at the males and females. You probably can't tell them apart anyway. They haven't differentiated along that track yet. But of those 198 specimens that I found when I went into the wet collections, only about 58 of them were actually included in the spreadsheet document that I was handed. So not only is there this huge sex bias that is completely unexplored, as I'm sure you all know, a lot of herpetological specimens haven't even made it onto the internal spreadsheets that collections will use, much less facilities or organizations like GBIV that allow for the sharing of those specimens more easily. And then the statistics suggest that there is a sex bias in this collection, which is really interesting because it sort of makes sense. American bullfrogs do have very different behaviors during the breeding season. The males are a lot more conspicuous and thus probably easier for people to encounter out in their environment and to collect. So some future directions where this project could be taken, starting to look at options for maybe non-invasive soft tissue imaging to actually be able to look for things like testes or ovaries inside the animals without actually having to open them up and without having to do that destructive sampling could be a really productive direction for a lot of locations. If you are a collection manager and you're getting in herpetological specimens, or you have a research project that's going on, and those researchers are wanting to deposit specimens into your collection, if you can try and squeeze any sort of information on if they have males or females out of them and get that on the labels would be really helpful for future research with the collections to include and account for this sort of vast chunk of missing data. And then genetic testing may have some limited utility for proving out animals. Problem with the genetic testing is that a lot of herps actually have temperature determined sexes. So a lot of animals like turtles, if they're incubated at specific temperatures, they'll develop along male or female pathways. Much more difficult to tell them apart genetically than with, for people who are working with mammals, where you generally have mammals or birds where you generally have a pretty clear way to do it. So I do want to say thank you to Dr. Aaron Kuberwitz for the support throughout this project, and thank you to the Yukon's Biodiversity Research Collections for access to their frogs.
Questions for Alyssa? Did you consider the possibility of just making a slit in your specimens and using a light and looking to see if you could identify testes and ovaries that way?
I did not consider that possible method.
Yeah.
It could definitely be an interesting way to possibly go back in and try and confirm out some of the assignations. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Awesome.
Okay, we have a few minutes before our next talk should begin. So if anyone has questions for a prior speaker, if you want to go back to one of the earlier talks, that will be all right as well during this period while I change slides. So, anyone? Over there.
Okay, so this question actually is for Alyssa. So you had mentioned that 95% of the specimens, herp specimens on GBIF don't have any sex-associated data. I'm a botanist, so I don't know, but are all herps as equally difficult to determine sex as the bullfrogs are?
Most of them are more difficult to determine sex than bullfrogs.
Okay.
So bullfrogs do have that, even if it's not exact and even if there is some overlap, there is a lot of differentiation out in the field between their calls and their colors, and also that, eardrum to eye size. In many herp species, they're functionally indistinguishable, just looking at external traits like this, especially in groups like the snakes and some of the lizards, although it depends which lizards you're looking at. It's very, very, very hard to tell them apart.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? I will point out that with my fellow researcher, Dr. Julianne Snyder, we release 10 or 12 tadpoles into a pond every few years and then raise them up and we look at behavior as they're metamorphosing. And the first year or two, it is really difficult to tell them apart. So that tympanum thing, yeah, that's good to know that's not us. Yeah.
I would definitely only recommend applying tympanum if you can. Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely only recommend applying tympanum if you have a basis for it. So if someone else has already done that work, or if you can do the work of dissecting it out and looking for those traits, and specifically in species where calling is an important behavior.
I think we have one more question if we have time.
Okay, one more question. Alana.
Oh, I had two people. Did you also have one?
Who? I don't know who was first.
Okay.
On the temperature thing, the Philadelphia Zoo has recently hatched 4 endangered Galapagos tortoises females that were incubated at one temperature, and they are waiting. They have other fertile eggs incubated at a different temperature, which they're hoping will hatch males.
It's really cool.
Okay, was there another question? We have just a minute left. We're going, one more question.
I was just wondering, considering that there was a cutoff for where you were even trying to determine sex, so 95% didn't have a sex associated. If everyone that could be sexed had done, there still would be a large percent that would not have associated sex data. And I'm wondering, like, do you know what percent even could have associated sex data?
Of that 95%, I'm not an expert on the paper, but my understanding is that they excluded all of the juveniles from their GBIF search. So everything that was in an egg or was small enough that had not been flagged by the original, small enough that the original institution had said, hey, this is a juvenile animal, those animals were already excluded from the search. So they were already looking at specifically just the adults.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Jessica Lane, talking about type curation and digitization at the Phyllocology Herbarium.
Hi, I'm Jessica Lane. I'm the Herbarium Collections Coordinator at the Phyllocology Herbarium at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. We have a lot of names. Speaking of names, let's talk about types. I want to start by saying I'm not a taxonomist, I'm not a systematist, that's not my expertise at all. I am a collections professional, so my work is focused on taking care of specimens and making sure that researchers have access to the specimens that they need. And types are a big part of that. Researchers are always asking for types. I'm sure you all know. So my work takes me into this area of complicated problems of taxonomy and systematics, and I wanted to share some of the strategies that I use, the workflow that I use, and the things I have learned tackling these problems. Starting with the absolute basics. What is a type? To put it most simply, a type is a representative of a taxon, and we have this at multiple levels of taxonomy. A family has a type genus, a genus has a type species, and a species has a type specimen. Of course, this is collections talk. We're talking about type specimens. There are also a lot of types of types. Actually, just saying type by itself is kind of vague and nonspecific. I'm not going to go too much into what all of these mean because they can actually change a little bit across disciplines, and I don't want to confuse any bug people or fish people by talking about my plant stuff too much. I do want to mention that paratypes, epitypes, and topotypes are not filed in our type collection. They are left in our general collection. I don't want to say it's because they're less important, because all specimens are important, but they are less significant, less unique in the conversation of types. So where do types come from? A type is designated when a new species is described by a researcher. So we imagine a situation where a researcher discovers a species new to science. Good for them. Now they have to write a paper and publish it. This is an example, Castanea revelii. There's an illustration on the left so that you have a nice picture to look at while I describe this big block of text. So this is the prologue that comes from the paper describing and naming this new species. We have the name at the top, Castanea revelii, described by Noel Holmgren. This big block of text in the middle is a very detailed description of all of the characteristics of that species. And then at the end we have the type information clearly describing where the type was collected, when it was collected, and the collector name and number. We also have really nice clear designation of the holotype deposited at the New York Botanic Garden Herbarium and isotypes distributed to many other institutions. This is kind of the ideal situation. Everything is nice and neat, clearly described. It's not always like that, unfortunately. When you're working with types, it's important to know your resources and especially know the resources that are available for your discipline. I'm at a herbarium, I'm working with plant resources. I'm using the International Association for Plant Taxonomy to understand the rules for how types are designated. JSTOR Global Plants is also really helpful. Global Plants is one of the earliest efforts to digitize plant specimen information at multiple herbaria and aggregate it all in a single database online, and they are specifically focused on types. They now have a database of over 2 million type specimens. And the International Plant Names Index is also really helpful as just a clear list of registered plant names. And now my processing workflow. The first one is probably the hardest. The other steps are all pretty simple. I tried to break this down into very simple steps, determining this type status. I often see specimens like this that just say type collection on them. Some of them are even worse. They just have type handwritten on them. That doesn't tell me much. I need to know, is this a validly published name? What type of type is it? Does the collection information match what's in the original paper? For that, I'm using Biodiversity Heritage Library to find that publication information. I'm using our own research library, curated by our wonderful librarian. And I'm using JSTOR Global Plants to check my work against other herbaria that have those duplicates of those types in their collections. Transcription, we're all familiar with it. I don't think I need to say too much about it. The thing that I do want to say is you should be aware if you need to upload data into multiple different places, make sure that you know the formats for those different places. We use Symbiota for our primary database, but then we also want our specimens to be on JSTOR Global Plants, and I'm sure it's a frustration of all herbarium people that those two use different formats. Next up, create labels. I see a lot of older specimens that have kind of messy labels, and so we want this type status and name to be clearly defined, and I'm also creating a label for the type folder. Red is a pretty standard color for types. It's nice and flashy and easily noticeable, so we've got red folders and red labels. Imaging. I'm going to be honest, herbaria, we have it easy. We have it so easy. Most of our specimens are flat. For types, we use this setup that's fairly old but still works really well. This is an Epson Expression 1640 XL scanner that's mounted upside down in an HerbScan frame. This platform raises and lowers so we can press the specimen up against that scanner glass. It'll take a really nice high-quality TIFF image of the specimen, and then we can drop it back down. Next, we file it into the type collection. Our types are removed from the general collection. They're filed in a couple of cabinets that's near the front of the herbarium, so if we ever need to evacuate them, we can do that quickly. And they're all red, and they are filed by genus. And last, upload data to collections database and to data clearinghouses. Again, we use Symbiota and JSTOR Global Plants. The last thing that I want to mention is a little story that I found when I was working on our type collection. This, again, is Castanea revelii, described by Noel Holmgren. In the prologue, he said, "I named this species for James L. Reveal, who first noticed this lovely paintbrush. His enthusiastic appreciation for this find had much to do with the fact that there are 35 isotypes." I love this story because when I tell people who aren't familiar with collections about our botanic collection, they see it as just a bunch of dead plants. But when you tell them this guy was so excited he collected 35 of them, they start to understand, oh, there's some importance to this, there's some significance to this. And knowing these little stories helps us explain the importance to other people. That's all I have. If you have any questions, I will endeavor to answer them. Thank you.
I'm curious if you've ever come across a type that you're trying to figure out that you just haven't found anywhere, or maybe like what's the most unique specimen that you've come across so far?
I've definitely found things that were marked as a type but were never actually published. Let's see, the most unique. I mean, definitely this one is the one that stands out to me the most.
And so if you know that they aren't published names, do they just go back into the general collection at that point?
Yes, I would probably put them in as a genus indet.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So I worked with Noel Holmgren for 30 years, and James Reveal often visited, and they were grad students together, and they were very competitive with one another. And there's a little bit of sarcasm and a little bit of a dig in that comment.
I didn't want to throw him under the bus, but I do love this story.
Thank you very much. All right, we still have a little bit of time before we bring up our next speaker. So again, if you have questions for a prior speaker, now is a good time to ask them. So, anyone? So there are no questions, no other questions? So I have a general question about types, and you might or might not care to answer it. But I have frequently run into the idea that you would keep your holotypes separate from the rest of the collection, which makes very good sense because, of course, holotypes have no higher classification. They are only the types of a species. But the question about evacuating your types in the event of an emergency, your type is actually the best described specimen in your collection in most cases. So wouldn't it be better to evacuate the stuff that just came in from the field that hasn't even been looked at yet that might have new species in it? You can always name a neotype. We have a system for that. So.
That's a really good point. Yeah, the types have received a lot of attention, so maybe they're not the first thing that needs to be saved. It always breaks my heart to see all of the stuff in boxes that I'm not sure will ever get processed, or when it will ever get processed.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to lose any specimens, but I wonder, did you have could you take the microphone back to Barbara, please? Because it's a philosophical question in part. It's not one we're likely to run into, but I do think it's worth considering.
I think this is a different story if you're talking about animals versus plants or fungi. There are many, many plants and fungi, right, Andy, that are not well described. They're known from 6 words in Latin, and that's all there is. So, you know.
True. We have the same situation in older types for animals as well, but in general, your type is at least.
Yeah, but we don't have DNA from all of those types.
Well,
So.
Just philosophical there. All right. Uh-oh. Dirk has a question.
Maybe in addition, except for types, the more we sequence, the more we need reference specimens. And usually these are individuals that are sequenced, and they kind of have a similar, even though not the same status as a type specimen. Because if they are uploaded to GenBank or other platforms, and especially if you look into genomic sequencing, that is the reference point. And if those specimens are not well referenced, then that is a problem. The question is how these specimens are treated within our collections. And that is usually what is sequenced is the sample. But what about the specimen?
Good question. All right. Our next speaker is Michelle Kohler. And speaking of types, it is types 1, mold 0, the unexpected cost of mold remediation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Kohler. I am the Assistant Collection Manager at Illinois Natural History Survey Insect Collection. I've been there for about 12 years. This past spring, we had to deal with mold in our type fridge on wooden vial racks. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the experience, how we dealt with it, and what it ended up costing us. Okay, I got it. Okay. For those of you who may or may not know, in insect collections, the best way to store certain types is in 70 to 90% ethanol in a refrigerator that's kept at 34 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The specimens are in glass vials with special plastic lids that have inserts that prevent evaporation. They then go into a vial rack that goes the full length of the fridge and then goes into the fridge. With this experience that we had, the question came up, what is the best way to prevent future mold issues? Is there a better way to store specimens, especially our type specimens? So let's look at mold. Mold is a fungus, and it's spread through spores. So that means that it can be spread through air, touch, water, surfaces. It's very easily spread. There are more than 250,000 types of mold identified, with many more unidentified. As you may know, mold feeds on organic material. Its primary purpose is to decompose organic material, recycling it back into the environment. This is a very important part of natural ecosystem. Unfortunately, it's a very bad part of a natural history collection. In our collections, we commonly have things of organic matter like leather, paper, insects, mammals, a lot of organic material that we obviously don't want destroyed or damaged. Mold can also cause materials not just to be damaged, but to be stained, to be discolored, or even just to be deteriorated. All right, there are 4 main steps involved in mold remediation: inspection and testing, containment, removal, and restoration. According to Angie's List, a home mold inspection costs on average of $670. I point that out because there's nowhere that it lists how much it costs to inspect your museum collection. As we all know, our collections are much larger and cost a lot more money because they're specialized, that sort of thing. The second step, containment. Depending on how bad your mold issue is, you could have to set up a negative air pressure zone. Your personal protective equipment. You do not want to be breathing in mold. You do not want to be touching it. You don't want to be moving it from one surface to another. After that, the third step is removal. You have to remove the mold from the collection. In a home, this often involves things like tearing out walls, tearing out carpets. Once mold moves into a surface, it's very hard to get rid of it. And then the final step is restoration. Rebuilding or renovating, redoing what was lost. And in natural history collections, that is not always possible. You know that obviously we have things that are not replaceable, historical items. For us, in the spring of this year, we found a large mold infestation in our type fridge. It's a type fridge, so obviously we don't go into it very often. We noticed some moisture and some mold on the wood vial racks, and we decided, obviously, we needed a solution. So we decided to get rid of the wooden vial racks and replace them with acrylic. My boss, Tommy, took an unused vial rack to a local business and got a quote. Our facilities and services people told us because we wanted the type of vial rack we wanted, they could no longer make them for us. By the time they arrived, our mold infestation was pretty darn big. Instead of just being a space about this, it was most of the refrigerator. We had the refrigerator examined and had the coils cleaned, and it was determined that the most likely cause of the moisture inside the refrigerator was that the door had possibly been left open at some point and that the coils needed to be cleaned. So it was determined that we had solved the problem, but we were still left with the mold. Tommy and I geared up in N95 masks and gloves, and we spent one whole day transferring every vial to a new vial rack. We also disinfected the inside of the refrigerator. We used Lysol, which you can ask me why later, and then we wiped it down after that with the 70% ethanol. Between the two of us, I estimated it was more than 10 man-hours of work that should not have needed to have been done. We threw all the vial racks that were in the refrigerator away. We didn't keep any of them, even the ones that did not have obvious mold on them. We ended up having to get rid of all of them. So the original vial racks that we used cost us $2.06 a piece to make. The facilities and services, we provide them with the supplies, they make vial racks, and that is the top vial rack in that photo. And they're nice vial racks. They go the full length of the refrigerator, and they're clear on one side, so you don't have to pull out every vial to make sure you have the right one. The new vial racks cost us $7.18 a piece, and we had to buy 400 of them. So that's a cost of $2,800. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge amount, but it still cost us. So for us, we just skipped right over the first step. Let's be honest. It was mold, it had to go. So we didn't really care what type of mold it was, because after we had the fridge looked at, we knew it wasn't spreading. It was on the outside of everything. It was eating through the wood, but it wasn't damaging the specimens themselves. They were in glass vials. They were safe. So we skipped right over the first step and hopefully saved ourselves a whole bunch of money. For containment, we did the full PPE. We geared up with our N95 masks and our gloves. We kept everything to one room, which was a separate research room. We did it all in one day, and the vial racks went immediately outside the building. We had to get rid of all the wood vial racks. That was our removal step. We also cleaned out the inside of the refrigerator very well. As for rebuilding, like I said, we had to buy about 400 new vial racks at a cost of $2,800. Beyond that, fortunately, none of our type specimens themselves were damaged. So in some ways, our instance with mold, although scary, was not nearly as costly as it could have been. I'd like to thank the people who helped me with all of the information that I got for this. And if you have questions afterwards, I do have business cards. Thank you. Yeah, I've got time for questions.
Are there questions for Michelle?
There's one.
That was really great, thank you. Did you consider just asking your mycology colleagues down the building if they could do like a unofficial ID for you at the Illinois National History Survey? You've got a lot of mycologists there.
You know what, we didn't really. It was more of a get rid of it now because it's in the types fridge thing. If there had been more damage, like there is a type of mold that grows in ethanol, and if there had been problems with the specimens themselves or in the ethanol, we probably would have gone like a little bit further. But because it was contained, no, it was more of just get rid of it. And I'm sure the mycology department is probably mad because it probably was a great opportunity for them to have gotten some samples and we destroyed them. And looking back, I mean, we could definitely could have done that.
Over here. Other way. Hi. So I missed the very beginning of your talk. I apologize. But as in mammalogy, we don't put our type specimens in fridges. So I was just curious more about the thought process behind that.
Okay, so in entomology, we do have pinned, and then we also have the wet collections. Anything with a soft body, aquatic insects where all of the larval stages grow in water, anything with a soft body, spiders, which are not insects but are included in insect collections, caterpillars, things like that, all get stored in 70 to 90% ethanol in a glass vial, plastic lid, in a refrigerator at 34 to 40 degrees.
Is that recommended? Sorry. Do you know, is that recommended for other types of collections? Because I've just never heard of it before, and I
know that is what's recommended for that type of specimen. I would assume if you had something that matched those parameters of being a soft body that is not going to dry out well, that would be the recommended. But I don't work in other collections, so I really can only answer for insects. Thank you. You're welcome.
Other questions?
Was there any consideration given to cleaning the outside of the vials themselves to remove mold spores?
Yes, and we did on the vial racks that were really disgusting, that really was obvious. We wiped them down with ethanol, and then if there was obvious mold, the Lysol.
Did you have any problems with the labels? Because I've worked in entomology collections before, and I know that most of the vials I put away were labeled with Sharpie on the outside.
Okay, so because this was a type collection, we had recently gone through and moved most of our types into the newer thing where because yes, I have a lot of researchers who like to write on the rubber stopper their determination with a Sharpie. It's so annoying. So most of our types have been recurated with all of the label information inside the vial.
Nice.
Yes, so very fortunate that we had recently redone that.
Other questions?
You said we could ask later why Lysol. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, actually, there was a spinach paper a number of years ago, and before I joined Spinach, that talked about the use of Lysol on mold in collections, and I personally have used it to get mold off of actual specimens. You take a beetle, or I've even done flies, and you take the old Lysol, don't use aerosol cans, and you take it in a pipette and you drop it on the specimen, and then you just brush all the mold off with a paintbrush, and it dissolves it and it comes right off. It's really awesome to watch if you have a super moldy thing, because it really just eats right through the mold and it all comes off. So that's why. Yeah, it is really cool, and it comes from spinach. Oh.
Other questions? All right, thank you very much. So this brings us to, let me get to the right thing here. All right, this brings us to Andrew Wilson, who threatened to talk longer than his allotted time and has wound up with 4 extra minutes. So I don't know how you did that. You have won the lottery.
Oh, thank you. I'm wondering if I should wait for people who are looking forward to this. I'm sure you all were, because this is it.
You can just freelance until then.
Yeah. I was joking all conference that I'm the headliner, obviously being the last position. But that's not the case, I'm sure, and I'm likely to tax your already short attention spans, because I practice cramming through a lot of slides, even though now I don't need to do it. But this was a data-rich project that we did, putting out a survey, so I have a lot of data-heavy slides, even though they're kind of simple data. They're basically survey results. But I'm the Associate Curator of Mycology at Denver Botanic Gardens. I want to acknowledge my co-conspirators, co-authors who helped put the survey together and also helped, review some of these slides as well. Some of them are probably familiar to you because they've been creeping around the conference the whole time. And they're also members of this Fungaria Management Working Group that started in 2023. I wanted to give a little bit of background about the group and why we came up with a survey to try to understand the state of Fungaria, and that's going to be what this talk is mostly about. And then I'm going to ultimately try to interpret some of this data that came through. The Fungaria Management Working Group is kind of something that I've been thinking about, because one of the hats that I wear as part of my responsibility is in working with the amateur mycology community. I am the chair of the Voucher Collection Project for the North American Mycological Association. It's the umbrella group for lots of fungal clubs, mycological clubs across North America. Lots of very interested amateur mycologists are in this group. And back in 1997, the decision was made that instead of just creating a species list that wasn't verifiable into the future, the the forays would attempt to voucher at least one specimen of each species that came through the forays. And these have been housed at the Field Museum of Natural History. Now, as you're probably aware of, mycology and mushrooms are going through a moment, and there's a lot of energy in the amateur community currently. Whereas in the collection space, fungaria are kind of lacking in some of that enthusiasm. And so I've been constantly, as a curator and as I joined Denver Botanic Gardens, I've been wondering how to leverage some of that public energy towards putting into fungarium collections and managing and generating more value to these collections. And so as a result, I wanted to bring together a bunch of like-minded individuals. It started off with a few handfuls of people I knew in the fungarium collections community, and it quickly blew up as interest grew to about at least 30 people that we know now, but these are mostly North American fungaria. Ideally, the plan is to expand more globally because there's lots more collections and a lot more fungi. And we had some early questions such as, what is the current state of fungaria in North America? How can we collaborate to support fungal collections? What are some of the major concerns these fungaria face? And what are some of the opportunities to support them? And I've also been getting interests from organizations or collections that don't have fungal collections but want to start them because they're starting to see the enthusiasm in mycology happening in the public. So what we decided to do to investigate some of these questions is to start a survey. And so when we put together the survey, we had 4 general parts we wanted to put together. This pie chart sort of indicates which questions fall into each of these categories, which represent questions that ask the individual, what are the general composition of your fungal collections? How do you get support for the maintenance of the collections? Who uses the collections? And do you have particular goals for the collections going forward and into the future? In total, there's 22 questions in the survey. 3 of these questions, however, were not in any of these 4 different categories. To implement the survey, we wanted to track down people who could answer them. So we looked in Index Fungorum, or Index Herbariorum, for emails to various different collections in North America, and there's about 1,300 emails we harvested from the index. And then we built a survey using the Alchemer software that we could allow us to provide a link and collect some of the answers and responses from the people who took the survey. In total, in a general overview of the responses, we had 102 institutions out of those 1,300, so a small fraction, but yet a nice representation of people who responded. These were from 87 different institutions. 75 of them were from the United States, 5 were from Mexico, and another 6 were from Canada. Now, the questions were asked and provided opportunities to answer in a number of different ways. We had multiple answer questions where you can check multiple boxes related to the collections. Some were single answer questions. We had a couple questions that were ranking answers, so you had a list of answers and you can rank them in level of importance towards your collections. And then we also had a number of fill-in responses, which were a little bit more technically challenging to summarize, but yet insightful in terms of individual responses. Now, in terms of the answers, in the first category, when it comes to the composition of these collections, we asked, like, how large is your herbarium, the botanical and mycological collections put together? The majority of the collections were involved more than 25,000 different specimens. But when we asked them how big is the fungal part of those collections, over 60% said they had fewer than 5,000 fungal specimens. So while there's a number of different collections out there with fungi in them, they don't have a lot of fungi, or most of the collections don't have a lot of fungi to manage. Most of the collections involved macrofungi, the mushrooms that you were mostly familiar with that are easy to collect, as well as lichens, also relatively easy to collect. Pathogenic fungi, a very important group, was the 3rd place. The fewest number of collections come from the microfungi, which is interesting because these probably represent the most of the kingdom in terms of biodiversity. but yet, for obvious reasons, are more difficult to collect and maintain within collections. Now, in terms of the number of collections digitized, there's an interesting issue with this because a lot of the collections, or the biggest category here, was no specimens were digitized in the collection, and this will sort of have consequences with some of the other responses by the respondents. Where does the financial support come from? It's nice to know that many of the organizations or the collections said that they had institutional programmatic support, but not an insignificant number of institutions had zero support for their collections. In terms of who manages the collections, there's actually a significant amount of respondents suggested or stated that they had students and volunteers managing and working with their collections. It's also nice to know that there's some full-time curators as well as full-time assistant collections managers involved with the collections as well. Now, some of the challenges here going forward might be explained by the fact that even though they got some good personnel support, a lot of them complained that they are lacking in the taxonomic expertise necessary to manage these collections. And this is something we kind of anticipated, but what's also interesting, and it relates to the last result, or the result we got earlier, which is that many of them don't know how to digitize their specimens or don't have ability to digitize their specimens. I don't know if this is accurate across herbaria by and large, but I think, you know, if this is a problem for fungal collections, it's probably an issue for the herbarium by and large. Another issue, and this third in this category, is something that we might be able to tackle as a fungarium management working group, is best practices. We can probably, as a community, work on educating other collections on how to better maintain and manage their collections. Another interesting point that was also relevant to a previous answer was the last time they received a fungal loan, which was more than a year ago, is the vast majority of responses. This probably has to do with the fact that many of the collections aren't digitized. How do you have access to what specimens are available in order to borrow and use for research if you don't have any record of it digitized or available online? Another issue was how relevant are the collections? How up to date are they? Are they growing? Are they being added to? And it looks like from the majority of the respondents, a lot of these collections are not growing or not being added to by anything. But there's some interesting responses to this as well, or potential solutions. In the ranked category responses, we were asked the questions, in what ways are the collections being used? Most of the collections are being used by academic as well as student research. And then we asked, like, in what ways are the collections growing or being contributed to? Academic faculty scientists are the ones, or the top ranked answer, but what's nice to see is the second ranked answer is the amateur community. The amateur mycologists are also contributing heavily to a lot of these collections. So I think this is kind of feeds into my role and my interest in leveraging what the amateur community can bring to collection space. The last category, which was what are the goals of these collections, these were largely fill-in responses, so comments by the individual respondents. And so we just kind of broke down a lot of these responses into individual categories. And so one of the first questions was, what is your limitations to being able to accept specimens into the collections? And the number one answer was expertise. But then there was a lot of other answers when it came to availability of resources. And in terms of resources, we're talking about space, we're talking about the time, materials, funding. Those are other big categories or relevant categories to this kind of issue of being able to grow and accept collections. Now, we were also interested in understanding the amateur contributions to these collections. And it's pretty significant because you can see that the most of the respondents suggested that they have a lot of contributions from the amateur mycological community, whereas the second most abundant responses said they had no contributions from the amateur mycological community. Now, in relation to the limitations pie chart, they said expertise was a problem. Some of the respondents came back and said, our expertise comes from the amateur community. And that's kind of an important resource and connection that I feel like is underutilized. So to summarize some of these answers, Fungaria are largely composed of big collections, but with a much smaller component of fungal specimens. Their maintenance support largely comes from institutions. However, there is some others that receive no financial support whatever to support their collections. And they get a lot of personnel support from students as well as volunteers. Few loans are either accepted or received from Fungaria, and then most of the collections are used for research for either academic scientists or mycologists or students. But amateurs are significant contributors to the growth of these collections. Expertise is a major limiting factor, but amateurs are potentially a large underutilized source. So in order to see the takeaways, Fungaria do function. They are struggling like most collections are, but a lot of this probably has to do with a low availability of expertise. And as a result, when we could argue that these collections are low in priority when it comes to managing because of that lack of expertise. And areas of support are needed in practices and documentation, expertise, some personnel support. As a Fungaria management working group, some of these things we can address directly, such as practices and documentation. One of the things we are planning on as a group is a best practices sort of document or potentially series of documents. And right now, the model that we're going off of is by Rabler et al. In 2019, which is a Herbarium Practices and Ethics paper, which kind of outlines a lot of what Fungaria can do, but we can add a lot more specific details because of the specific nature of fungi. I'm also suggesting a second survey, which targets the amateur mycology community, asking them what are their interests, barriers, enthusiasms for actually working with collections, providing their expertise, providing their growth, providing expertise in terms of resources or contributions, so that we can sort of leverage both sides of this equation a little bit better. And then there's an interest for extended specimens. This is a concept that we've talked a lot about and all across the field. And this is important for fungi as well because the North American Mycological Association has a DNA NAMA committee that is specifically leverages these garage punk rock band style DNA sequencing laboratories that the amateur community is really engaged in because these amateurs are buying min-ions and sequencing all the fungi that they can get their hands on. So there's a lot of data and DNA sequences being generated for these specimens that could potentially extend a lot of these specimens and the values of collections by and large. We can leverage that with tools like iNaturalist and the precursor to iNaturalist, which many of you might not be familiar with, which is Mushroom Observer. It began before iNaturalist even existed. But these tools can be modified and adapted to creating these more valuable specimens and records for scientific research and mycology in general. So I want to thank my co-authors, the Fungaria Management Working Group, survey respondents, Spnhc, of course, and the supporting institutions, things like Index Herbariorum, which we couldn't have done the survey without, or it would have been much more difficult to collect those emails. And then software like Alchemer and, of course, Rachel Moreno, as well as at Denver Botanic Gardens for helping implement the survey. And so with that, I think we're okay.
Questions about the world of Fungaria? Oh, lots.
All right, I'm going to start here and work my way over there.
Hello. I have kind of a convoluted question, I suppose, but as the amateur access and cost of whatever of sequencing for fungi is decreasing exponentially, and how it's been said that the taxonomy of fungi is one of the biggest barriers, I was curious to know about your opinion on the matter of DNA as types that was debated about and stuff shot down last year in Madrid. And if you think the fungi community will have to separate into their own nomenclature guidelines in order to achieve that, if they think that is what's most effective, and how that could impact Fungaria going forward.
That's a very kind of big philosophical question. And I think a lot of those sequencing of types comes from the fact that much of the taxa and the species that we know about or believe to be out there in nature come from, just the environmental sequencing aspect. I think it's sort of challenging. I think from my personal perspective, it doesn't make sense to use DNA as a type, especially for the fungi that we know we can have voucherable, collectible material from. There's going to be probably certain categories of fungi where you'll never really have a good specimen of. So that's kind of where it gets in a gray area with fungi, and then maybe it's going to expand into understanding how fungi could be a hybrid of what the microbial community is doing in terms of their description of organismal diversity versus what the eukaryotic multicellular organisms categories are doing where they have voucherable specimens. I work in the world of macrofungi, so I would argue against using sequences as types, even though we haven't found that specimen. Doesn't mean the specimen isn't somewhere hidden in our collections. So, and it's necessary. I know being in the museum community, there's not much you can do with the DNA sequence, right? It's going to be ones and zeros on a computer somewhere, which is still important for the data management people, but the specimen in and of itself has so much more to offer instead of just a sequence. That's another challenge to communicate to the amateur community, because many of them believe if we just sequence the barcode, then what do we need the specimen for? That's a whole nother can of worms, maybe another spinach talk later down the line. But it's an interesting philosophical question. It's going to be a debate that they're going to have for a while, and it's going to be a while before I think they come to a final solution. But where and when you can have a vouchered specimen, yes, voucher a specimen. That's my take at the moment.
Could you go back to the last pie chart that you showed? Okay, I want to know your philosophy/insight on why there is almost this 50-50 split where you have some collections relying a lot on amateurs and then another half completely just not accepting or letting amateurs kind of put specimens in their collections. Is this rural versus urban? Is this like east versus west? Like, what are we seeing?
Okay, so that's a nuanced question. I think I'm going to have to preface that this pie chart and this interpretation of the data points comes from the fact that this is how we were interpreting the fill-in responses. So it might not be totally accurate, but to take your point, why do some collections welcome amateur contributions versus other collections being reticent? And I think a lot of it happens to do with capacity. Some collections might not have the expertise or the ability to manage a lot of strangers coming into the collections and dealing with stuff. So that's a good point. And I guess it also comes with the willingness of the managers to want to work with the fungi on top of it. So anyway, so this is kind of one of the reasons why we created the Fungarian Management Working Group, to analyze these problems and then essentially try to evaluate and maybe ameliorate the issue going forward. And so hopefully at some point this blue pie chart can get smaller and the red can get bigger, and with the idea that we can encourage collections to say, don't be afraid of your local expertise. These are people that are passionate about fungi. All we want to do is train them to help you. I think that's the best way I can think about leveraging this power of the amateur community.
Hi, could you just tell us, what does a fungarium look like? What are the samples? Are they dried? Are they flat? Are they in alcohol?
I call them my mushroom mummies. Because like plants, and fungi are plants, right? Traditionally, they have been. And I don't know if you saw some of the talks by the Cube presenters, but they would have type specimens out that were treated like plants. So they're smushed on a piece of paper and mounted like a plant. We've gone away from that for sure, because they're more three-dimensional objects. But even then, you dry them out because water is damaging the collections. And you lose a lot, but at the same time, there's still a lot of characteristics there. So the specimen, what we try to do is we try to get an in situ, ex situ, fresh image of the specimen so we know what it looks like before we sucked all the moisture out of it. It then comes dried and looks like a mummified mushroom. And so that usually gets put inside of a specimen box with the labels, and we add notes and everything like this, as well as some tissue paper inside of it so it doesn't rattle around inside the box to preserve it. All archival material, acid-free. And these get stored in boxes with labels and then get filed away much like you would any other specimen in an herbarium setting. So mushroom mummies in their coffins in a larger collection is kind of probably the best way to picture it.
Yeah, go ahead and just shout.
But I'm happy to just talk. I was just going to say, so I came from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, where I primarily worked in aquarium, and our fungarium was completely separate. And in my 3 years of being there, I actually only saw it on my last semester there because they were it wasn't as active and so on. And anyway, I wanted to preface and kind of bring back your question on the amateurs versus non-amateurs. Is in my thesis, I summarized Tennessee's. I'll come back to the fungarium. But I summarized Tennessee's herbarium data that was digitized. In that, the collections that had the most variable collectors tended to have, so collections that have more prominent collectors, and they were very active. So in Tennessee, we had Dr. Robert Krall. He was in every collection, basically. He was a very prominent collector. He was a professional botanist, so on. All the collections that had more variable, so their top collectors only had maybe 20 max specimens to their name or so on, tended to be collections that did not offer formal degrees in botany. So they taught classes where they would do class collections, but you couldn't necessarily get a formal degree there. So a lot of these accessions were coming from course offerings, not from formal floras, name collections, and so on. So I wonder if that's maybe it. It's just they don't have a lot of people who are spending more time on it than just a class. So maybe that's kind of a way is, you know, if they already don't have a lot of, I don't want to say dedication in that way, but like they don't have a lot of dedicated people who are just collecting mycological specimens and so on. But anyway, so maybe that would be something that was going on there.
Yeah.
And then the secondary part was, so at UTC, our fungarium, it had about 3,000 specimens, I believe, but only about 700 of them were digitized skeletally by a single student who was working on integrating them into a symbiotic portal and everything. But either way, everything you described in a sense of all these other things where it's, you know, based on student labor, just student interest in general, where you're only going to get students a blue moon who even know about it or are interested enough to dedicate their time and resources to it, perfectly describes UTC's fungarium, where it's well kept, but it's also organized by year. So it's completely random boxes full of these packets based on what year they were collected in and no other distinguishing information.
Yeah.
And then last year by Christmas, we got a Christmas gift of about 600 specimens from somewhere else. And yeah, they were just randomly thrown in a big box mailed to us. And I guess ultimately where I'm going with this is there was a student, the reason I even saw our fungarium is because we had a very interested student who was wanting to learn from me how we digitize our aquarium. So I was trying to show him those steps, and he was very interested and so on. But is there some type of resource that I can kind of direct him towards? Because when you were talking about this paper and things like that sounds incredible. And he would be so excited to hear that. So I was wondering if there's anything that kind of already exists. I've just not explored those things. So I would love
Yeah.
to be able to direct somebody.
Yeah, so I don't think I could summarize all of that into the microphone for the records. But essentially, the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga had an herbarium, was growing it through student participation. I think a lot of our responses sort of reflected what you were saying. So thank you for validating what I was talking about a lot. But Yeah, so you were asking whether or not there's like references for digitizing specimens, mycological specimens specifically. We're going to be trying to work and develop this. I believe in terms of herbaria, in general, we use a lot of the same rules and references that herbaria uses, minus the flat scanner, because ours are more 3D. You can't squish it against a scanner and get the same kind of scan. So we do have like an overhead mounted camera for both our herbarium specimens as well as our mycological specimens. So they both fit on a grid-like pattern, so you can take a picture of the box, the collection in and of itself, all of the box labels and information. And so ideally at some point when we do have this better best practices, we will include some recommendations on how to digitize your collections or how to create a digitizing setup for imaging the specimens. And then, when it just comes to record keeping, we use the Mycology Collections portal, also known as the Myco portal. And it's a resource that's being run out of the Natural History Survey out of Illinois. And right now, it's kind of basically the main database for all mycological collections that it's based off of a Symbiota platform. So other than that, I'm happy to talk about these things more. I'm sorry I didn't include in advance my email address, but I've got cards if you want one. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So thank you.
There's one announcement Andy asked me to make. Buses to PSB. You need to meet at the 4th floor of the Union. That is the ground level floor. And you will get directions there. Those buses will leave at 3:45. It is now 3:25. Other tours will also meet on the 4th floor as directed previously. So thank you to all the speakers and you all the audience, to Christian, our technician, and our microphone runner.